is harder. I'm the best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me. Lynx is a conqueror. No, I'm Alexander. He's no Alexander. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody as ruthless. I'm Sonny Liston. I'm Jack Dempsey. There's no one like me. I'm from their cloth. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable. And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah.
In the summer of 1966, in the heart of Brooklyn, New York, a child was born into a world that was anything but welcoming. Michael Gerard Tyson, known to the world simply as Mike Tyson.
Good evening. We're coming off the bloodiest year in the history of New York, 1,784 homicides.
Came into existence in a place where poverty, crime, and struggle were more than just words. They were the reality of everyday life. His mother, Lorna Mae Smith, was a woman of determination and grit, but life had dealt her a difficult hand. She fought daily to provide for her children, navigating the challenges of single motherhood in a time when opportunities were scarce and dangers lurked around every corner. Mike's father, Purcell Tyson, was an almost mythical figure in his life, present in name, but absent in action. The man who would have a greater influence in his early years was Jimmy Kirkpatrick, a man with a passion for baseball, but an even stronger inclination toward the streets. Jimmy wasn't a stable provider. Instead, he was off and out, engaging in his own activities, leaving Mike, his siblings, and their mother to fend for themselves.
Everything she does for you is for her survival. Everything your mother do for you is for your survival.
Life in Brooklyn during the 1960s and 1970s was tough, especially for a family struggling to make ends meet. They first lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant, an area that was becoming increasingly difficult due to rising crime rates and economic hardship. Later, they moved to Brownsville, a neighborhood notorious for its rough streets and the survival mindset it demanded of its residents. For many young boys growing up there, becoming involved in street life wasn't a matter of choice. It was often a necessity. Gangs ruled the blocks, and if you weren't feared, you were prey. Mike, as a child, was far from the menacing figure he would one day become. In fact, he was quite the opposite. Shy, quiet, and often bullied. He had a soft-spoken nature and an unmistakable lisp that made him an easy target for ridicule.
What we can't get from human beings, and that's loyalty. And that's what the connection is with them.
One of the few sources of comfort he found was in pigeons. While other kids were out causing trouble, getting into fights, and making names for themselves on the streets, young Mike found solace in the simple act of caring for birds. Pigeons fascinated him. They weren't just pets to him. They were companions, creatures he could care for, and in some ways the only thing in his life that felt stable. He would spend hours tending to them, feeding them, and watching them fly, imagining that he too could escape the life he was born into. But the world around him was cruel. One day, a neighborhood bully, eager to establish dominance over the quiet, awkward boy, did something that would change Mike forever. He killed one of his pigeons. The shock, the heartbreak, and the fury that boiled inside Mike in that moment were overwhelming. He had never felt rage like that before. He lashed out, attacking the bully with a force no one had ever seen from him. For the first time, he realized something important. He had power. He had strength. And for once, people feared him.
One guy put a bird on and ran out, so I ran after him. Please give me my bird. Please, can I have my bird? Oh, you want your bird? First smack me. You want this? And the bird ripped the bird head off, hit me with the bird, threw blood on me, smacked me around. So my friend said, Mike, fight him. Don't be afraid. Fight him. And if he beats you up, I'll help. You know what I mean? He never planned on jumping in if I got my butt kicked. I know that. But I just fought, and it's not like I was sensational. I was just flaring away, and I guess I hit him more than he hit me, so I won.
From that moment on, Mike was no longer just a kid who got pushed around. He started fighting back. But in a place like Brownsville, once you started fighting, you never stopped. As he got older, he found himself getting into more trouble. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was learning the ways of the street. He started stealing, getting involved in small-time crimes, and running with the wrong crowd. By the time he was just 13 years old, he had already been arrested 38 times. Most of the offenses were for street fights, robberies, and minor assaults. The world had given him very few options, and the path he was on seemed inevitable. At the same time, his appearance had started changing. The shy little boy who used to get bullied had transformed into a stocky, intimidating teenager with an unusual amount of strength. His fists were like weapons, and his reputation was growing. But no matter how tough he became on the outside, on the inside, he was still just a kid trying to survive. One of those arrests would lead to an event that changed the course of his life forever. After being sent to the Tryon School for Boys, a juvenile detention center in upstate New York, Mike met someone who would introduce him to his future. Bobby Stewart, a former boxer and counselor at the center, saw something in Mike that few others had noticed. He saw potential. Mike wasn't just a kid who could throw punches. He was a natural fighter. His speed, his power, and his ability to absorb hits were unlike anything Stewart had seen before. Stewart started training Mike, teaching him the basics of boxing. For the first time, Mike had an outlet for all the anger, frustration, and pain he had bottled up inside. And he had something even more valuable, someone who believed in him. It wasn't long before Stewart realized that Mike was meant for something bigger, something beyond juvenile detention centers and street fights. So he introduced him to the man who would shape his destiny, Cus D'Amato.
Because he helped me to deal with people. I know how to deal with people now. Before, I couldn't talk to people. I always want to be alone. And now I learned how to deal with anyone. I could talk to anyone, even about their problems. And it's like a father and son relationship. You know, even though he is my manager and trainer, sometimes I forget that because of the way we are. The first day he met me, he took me in his house. He didn't even know me.
I can say honestly, I have a very deep affection for him. I do. To me, he's my boy. He's with me. But I often say to him, you know, I owe you a lot, and he doesn't know what I mean, but I'm going to tell him now what I mean. If he weren't here, I probably wouldn't be alive today.
Cus D'Amato was no ordinary trainer. He had coached some of the best fighters in the world, and he knew talent when he saw it. The moment he met Mike, he recognized that this was no ordinary kid. This was someone who could be a champion. Cus took Mike under his wing, not just as a fighter, but as a son. He gave him a home, discipline, and a purpose. He taught him how to box, but more importantly, he taught him how to think like a winner. He taught him about strategy, about patience, and about using his mind just as much as his fists. Mike trained harder than ever before. Under Cus's guidance, he learned the peekaboo style of boxing, a technique that allowed him to move quickly, avoid punches, and launch powerful counterattacks. Day by day, he grew stronger, faster, and more skilled. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was training to become the best. But just as things were starting to look up, life delivered another painful blow. When Mike was only 16, his mother, Lorna May, passed away. The loss hit him hard. Despite their struggles, she had been his mother, his protector, the person who had brought him into the world. And now she was gone. It was a moment that could have pushed him further into darkness, but instead, it fueled his drive. Cus D'Amato officially became his legal guardian, and for the first time in his life, Mike had a father figure who truly cared about him. With Cus guiding him, the boy who had once been bullied, abandoned, and lost was now on a path to becoming something extraordinary. His journey was far from over, and the challenges ahead would test him in ways he could never have imagined. But one thing was certain. Mike Tyson was no longer just another kid from the streets. He was a fighter. And the world was about to find out just how powerful he could be. Defeat was a bitter pill to swallow, but for Tyson it was more than just a loss inside the ring. It was a moment that forced him to confront everything that had been crumbling around him for years, the reality that the unstoppable force he once was had become vulnerable, that the world, which had cheered for his meteoric rise, was now watching his downfall with a mix of fascination and judgment, waiting to see whether he would fade away into the history of fallen champions or find a way to fight back against the tide of adversity that had engulfed him. The headlines painted a brutal picture of his career, reducing his years of hard work, discipline, and sacrifice to nothing more than a tragic story of wasted potential. A cautionary tale of what happens when power, money, and fame collide with personal demons that have never been fully dealt with. The same people who once celebrated him as the most feared man in boxing now whispered that his time was over, that he had become just another name among those who had burned brightly and then faded just as quickly. And for someone like Tyson, who had built his entire life around proving people wrong, the sting of those words cut deeper than any punch he had ever taken in the ring. In the weeks and months that followed his lowest moments, he found himself trapped in a downward spiral where the discipline that had once been his greatest strength had long since vanished, leaving behind a reckless, lost man who no longer had the structure that had once given his life meaning, no longer had the constant training and mentorship that had kept him focused, and without that purpose, he drifted into destructive habits that only pulled him further away from the fighter, the man and the legend he had once been. The money, which had once seemed limitless, began to disappear at an alarming rate, vanishing into the hands of people who had never truly cared about him, spent on excesses that only provided temporary relief from the deeper pain he refused to acknowledge. And as he watched everything he had built start to collapse around him, the realization set in that no one was coming to save him, that the friends who had surrounded him in times of success were nowhere to be found in times of hardship. For the first time in his life, he had to ask himself a question that had never occurred to him before. If he wasn't the heavyweight champion of the world, if he wasn't the feared and respected Iron Mike, then who was he? And what was his purpose beyond the sport that had defined him for so long?
I don't have too many bad fights unless I lost them. I don't have many fights that I said, well, I lost that because I did this or that. I lost because I didn't have interest or something. Or I didn't, I underestimated somebody.
The legal troubles, the betrayals, the financial ruin, it all became too much. And for a long time, he sank deeper into the darkness, unable to see a way forward, believing that maybe the world was right, that maybe he really was finished, that there was no way back from everything that had happened. And in those moments of doubt, the voice that had once pushed him forward, the voice of Cus D'Amato, the man who had believed in him more than anyone else, seemed like a distant memory rather than a guiding force. But something inside him refused to fully give up, something deep within his soul. The same fire that had driven him to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history, that had made him train harder than anyone else, that had made him fight through pain, loss, and hardship before. It was still there, buried under years of mistakes and regrets, but it had never fully gone out. It wasn't about proving anything to the world anymore. It wasn't about reclaiming lost glory. It was about proving to himself that he was still capable, that he was still a fighter, not just in the ring, but in life. And so, slowly, step by step, he began to claw his way back from the abyss. The gym became his sanctuary once again, a place where the noise of the outside world didn't matter, where the opinions of critics and doubters held no weight, where the only thing that mattered was the work, the sweat, the discipline that had once made him great. And for the first time in years, he approached training not with arrogance or expectation, but with humility, knowing that this wasn't just about fighting, it was about rebuilding himself from the ground up. His body ached in ways it never had before, the years of punishment catching up to him, but he pushed through, reminding himself that pain had always been part of the process, that he had never been one to back down from a challenge, no matter how difficult, and day by day, he began to feel like himself again, not the reckless, out-of-control version the world had come to know, but the fighter who had once trained with a single-minded focus, the kid from Brooklyn who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The road was long, the setbacks were many, but he kept moving forward, not for fame, not for fortune, but for himself, for the chance to reclaim not just his career, but his life.
Mike Tyson!
Hello, I bear witness there's only one God, and Prophet Muhammad, may peace be unto him, is the prophet of God. I'm just happy to be here. Everybody's made their statements. Mr. McNeely had a cute statement. I'm just ready to fight. Thank you, everyone, for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The press would have a chance.
When he finally returned to the ring, the world watched with curiosity, some expecting a comeback story for the ages, others convinced that he was chasing something that had already passed him by. But as soon as the bell rang, as soon as he threw his first punch, it was clear that he wasn't done yet. The power was still there, the speed, the precision, the aggression that had once made him the most feared fighter in the world. It had never truly left him. And with each fight, he reminded the world that he was still a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't about recapturing a title. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about standing in that ring and knowing that he had fought his way back from the brink, that he had refused to let his story end in failure, that he had taken control of his own destiny when the world had counted him out. Even after his boxing career came to a close, his journey was far from over, because for the first time, he was learning to exist beyond the sport that had defined him. For so long, embracing the idea that his legacy wasn't just about his fights, but about everything he had endured, everything he had survived. He found new ways to channel his energy, stepping into the world of business, acting, and even comedy, showing a side of himself that many had never seen before, a man who had made peace with his past, who could laugh at his mistakes, who had learned the value of humility and growth. He wasn't the same angry, explosive young fighter who had stormed into the heavyweight division with nothing but raw power and fury. He was older, wiser, someone who had lived through the highest highs and the lowest lows and had come out the other side stronger for it. His name would always be etched in boxing history, not just because of his dominance in the ring, not just because of the records he set or the knockouts he delivered, but because of the journey he had taken, the battles he had fought both inside and outside the ring, the resilience that had defined his life. He had gone from a kid with no direction to a champion, to a fallen star, to a man who had found his way back, and that more than any title or accolade was the true measure of his greatness. He had learned that strength wasn't just about how hard you could hit, but about how many times you could get knocked down and still rise again. And in that sense, he had never been stronger. And so, as his story continued beyond the ring, one undeniable truth remained. No matter how many times he had fallen, no matter how many people had doubted him, no matter how dark the path had become, he had always found a way to fight back, to rise, to stand tall when the world expected him to stay down. He was more than a champion, more than a fighter, more than a legend. He was a survivor, a man who had been to the edge and refused to let it define him. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories like this. Mike Tyson was still a force of nature in the ring, but outside of it, the cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. The discipline that had once been the foundation of his greatness was starting to erode, giving way to a life filled with chaos, excess, and controversy.
Well, for example, rage against Evander Holyfield worked against you.
Well, it. It's a fight, so whatever happens, happens.
Mike, why do you have to talk like that?
Well, I'm talking to you the way I want to talk to you. Do you have a problem? Turn off your station.
You know what? I think we'll end the discussion right now.
Then we could.
You got it. Have a nice fight, Mike.
The young fighter who had once been molded by Cus D'Amato's strict training and mental conditioning was now living in a world of luxury, surrounded by people who were more interested in feeding his ego than keeping him grounded. Fame had brought him wealth beyond imagination, but with it came temptations, distractions, and a sense of invincibility that extended beyond the boxing ring. The world had crowned him the baddest man on the planet, but no one, not even Tyson himself, realized just how dangerous that title would become when the fight outside the ring became harder than the battles inside it. His fights were still generating global attention, drawing massive audiences who wanted to witness the raw power that had made him an unstoppable force in the heavyweight division. When Tyson stepped into the ring, there was an unshakable certainty that the fight would not last long. His opponents, some of the best fighters in the world, barely made it out of the first few rounds. Each punch he threw carried the weight of years of training, years of anger, years of proving himself against a world that had doubted him. His knockouts were vicious, sending his opponents crashing to the canvas before they even had a chance to figure out a strategy. He wasn't just a champion, he was a force of destruction, a fighter who didn't just want to win, but wanted to break the will of anyone who dared to stand in front of him.
Down. Was it just
constantly body punches? When I was hitting him with body punches, and I heard him, actually he was crying in there, making woman gestures like, I can't find it, but I knew that he was breaking down soon.
You're saying that Biggs was crying when you hit him?
Yes.
When did that happen?
And perhaps the fourth round on.
So that you knew you had him by that time?
Absolutely, but I knew he was tough in there taking those punches.
But as Tyson's reputation as an unstoppable champion grew, so did the chaos in his personal life. The world of boxing had always been filled with fast money, ruthless promoters, and people who wanted to take advantage of those who reached the top. Tyson, still young and without the guiding hand of Cus D'Amato, found himself surrounded by people who were more interested in what they could take from him, rather than what they could do for him. His finances were being drained by managers and advisors who claimed to have his best interests at heart. But behind the scenes, millions of dollars were slipping through his fingers. The discipline and focus that had once driven him to train relentlessly were being replaced by distractions, and the fighter who had once been the definition of dedication was now living a life where indulgence and recklessness were taking over.
That was amazing too. But
how does that happen?
Just being reckless and young and foolish and stuff, and really not caring.
Was it not caring or not having the sort of, we talked yesterday about role models and having the support system.
Well, I never had a good support system,
right.
So what I normally, I can't really blame anybody, even though you gotta have carried the weight of a fool by yourself. Other people contribute, but I blame everything on myself,
The media, once eager to praise him as the youngest heavyweight champion in history, began turning their attention to his troubles outside the ring. Headlines were no longer just about his incredible knockouts, but about the wild parties, the expensive cars, the reckless spending, and the growing list of legal problems. The public, who had once admired his rise from the streets of Brooklyn to the pinnacle of the sport, now watched as his life became more and more chaotic. His marriage, which had been highly publicized, was falling apart in the most dramatic way possible, with accusations flying and personal conflicts becoming a matter of public spectacle. What had once been a story of triumph was now turning into something else entirely. Something that felt like a warning about the dangers of unchecked fame and fortune. Yet, despite all of the distractions, Tyson still dominated inside the ring. He stepped through the ropes with the same menacing presence that had terrified opponents since the beginning of his career. His speed and power had not diminished, and his ability to end fights in devastating fashion remained unmatched. But those who had followed the sport for years could see something different. A slight change, an edge that wasn't as sharp as it once was. It wasn't about physical decline, but about the mental sharpness that had once defined him. The hunger that had made him train obsessively, that had made him a fighter who lived and breathed boxing, was no longer the same. The intensity was still there, but now it was clouded by distractions. Tyson's life outside the ring had become a whirlwind of extravagance. The money he was earning was being spent at an alarming rate. He was purchasing luxury cars by the dozen, filling his garages with vehicles that he would barely drive. Lavish, homes were being bought and abandoned just as quickly. His entourage had grown to include dozens of people, friends, hangers-on, bodyguards, and those who saw Tyson as their personal ticket to wealth and excess. Nights were spent in nightclubs, where the drinks flowed endlessly and the parties never seemed to stop. Women surrounded him wherever he went, and his reputation as a wild, unpredictable personality only added to his allure. But beneath the surface, the foundation that had once held his life together was beginning to crumble. The warning signs were there, but few people around Tyson were willing to tell him the truth. Those who had once guided him were gone, and those who remained had no interest in keeping him on track. He was still a champion, still an icon, but the cracks were widening. His training camps were no longer as disciplined as they had once been. He was skipping workouts, staying out late, and losing the structure that had once made him unbeatable. He was still winning, still knocking out opponents, but the gap between his best and his current state was growing. The fire that had once driven him was flickering, and those who understood the sport knew that when discipline fades, defeat is only a matter of time. Then came the moment that shocked the world. Tyson stepped into the ring as the undefeated, undisputed heavyweight champion, facing an opponent that many believed had no real chance against him. He was expected to win in the same brutal fashion as always, to walk in and impose his will on yet another challenger. But something was different. From the opening bell, he didn't look like the same Tyson. His movements were slower, his punches less precise. And when the unthinkable happened, when he was knocked down, struggling to get back up, staring into the lights in disbelief, the world watched in shock. The invincible warrior had been defeated, and in that moment, everything changed.
Just to try to get in the shot that will finish things in.
Oh, the uppercut.
What an uppercut by Douglas, and down goes Tyson.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's over. It's over.
Mike Tyson has been knocked out.
Unbelievable.
I'm gonna tell you something. To be honest, forgive me, God, there's no one that can outsell me. There's no one that can compete against me in my field. And when it comes to my field, I'm the best, and there's no one that can even compete.
Mike Tyson had always been different. From the moment he entered the ring as a professional fighter, it was clear that he was not just another young prospect working his way up the ranks. He was a force of nature, an unstoppable presence that left destruction in his wake. His fights rarely lasted long, and his opponents often left the ring dazed, battered, and wondering what had just hit them. The boxing world had seen power punchers before, but none with Tyson's combination of speed, explosiveness, and raw aggression. Every time he fought, there was a feeling of inevitability. No matter who stood in front of him, the outcome seemed predetermined. He was going to win, and he was going to do it in the most brutal way possible. The victories kept coming, and with each knockout, his reputation grew. He was no longer just a promising young fighter. He was a phenomenon. The way he moved, the way he threw punches, the way he carried himself, it all pointed to something special. Fans who had followed boxing for decades knew they were witnessing the rise of someone extraordinary. Fighters who had been in the game for years watched his tapes and saw something terrifying. A 20-year-old kid who fought with the skill and composure of a seasoned veteran, but carried the rage and hunger of someone who had nothing to lose. His name was spreading beyond boxing circles. The sports world took notice, the media latched onto the story, and suddenly, Tyson wasn't just a boxer, he was a rising star. As the buzz surrounding him grew, so did the pressure. He was still just a young man, but now he was carrying the weight of expectations that had crushed many before him. The sport had seen great fighters rise quickly, only to collapse under the weight of fame, fortune, and the relentless demands of the spotlight. But Tyson was different. He wasn't distracted by the attention. He wasn't thinking about the money or the endorsements. His focus remained locked on one thing: becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in history. He trained with the same intensity, fought with the same fury, and lived by the lessons Cus D'Amato had drilled into him. Control, discipline, and absolute dedication. Each fight was a step closer to that goal. His opponents became tougher, but it made no difference. They studied his past fights, watched footage, and came in with their own strategies, hoping to survive the early rounds. But Tyson's style was built to break men, not just physically but mentally. He didn't just punch hard, he overwhelmed his opponents from the moment the first bell rang. His footwork was fast, cutting off their movement before they could even find space. His head movement was sharp, making them miss while staying in range to counter. And when he threw, it was with the kind of force that could send a man crashing to the canvas in an instant. No matter what strategy they came in with, none of them had an answer. The boxing world wasn't just watching, it was holding its breath. Every fight felt like a warning to the heavyweight division. Tyson was coming, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop him. Champions and contenders alike started to take notice. Some dismissed him as too young, too inexperienced, claiming that he hadn't faced enough adversity to be tested. Others saw the truth. He wasn't just winning. He was tearing through the division in a way that hadn't been seen in decades. He wasn't just another name on the rankings. He was the future of the division, and everyone knew it. Outside the Ring life was changing fast. He had gone from a troubled kid in Brooklyn to one of the most talked about athletes in the world. He was making money at a rate he had never imagined, and the people around him were multiplying. Trainers, managers, promoters. Everyone wanted a piece of the young fighter who was destined for greatness. The sport was no longer just about fighting. Now, it was about business, about making the right moves, about navigating a world where trust was a rare commodity. Tyson didn't care much for the politics of boxing, but he was beginning to see how the world worked. The same people who built fighters up could tear them down just as quickly. He had to stay sharp, not just in the ring but in the life that came with being a rising superstar. The pressure to succeed was unlike anything he had faced before. He was no longer fighting in small arenas with only dedicated boxing fans watching. Now, every fight was an event. The arenas were packed, the cameras were rolling, and millions of people were watching from their homes. His name was on the headlines, his interviews were played on television, and his fights were dissected by sports analysts and boxing experts. Every move he made, every punch he threw, every word he spoke, people paid attention. Some cheered for him, others hoped to see him fall, but all of them were watching. Despite everything happening around him, his focus remained unchanged. The goal was in sight, and the moment he had been waiting for was finally within reach. Heavyweight championship, the thing he had dreamed of since he first laced up his gloves, was now just one fight away. He had fought his way to the top of the rankings, and now there was only one thing left to do: prove to the world that he was ready to take the throne. The fight was set. He would be facing Trevor Berbick for the WBC heavyweight title. Berbick was an experienced champion, a tough fighter who had been in the ring with legends like Muhammad Ali and Larry Holmes. He had seen it all, fought the best, and wasn't about to let a young challenger take his belt without a fight. But Tyson wasn't just another challenger. He was different. He was coming with a fury and hunger that Berbick had never encountered before. He wasn't coming to win on points. He wasn't coming to play it safe. He was coming to make history, and he intended to do it in the most dominant way possible.
On the line, the WBC Heavyweight Championship of the world. Trevor Berbick will try to stop Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson has trained his whole life for this. Look at him.
As the fight drew closer, the world waited. The media built up the story. Could the young knockout artist really become the youngest heavyweight champion ever? Could he handle the pressure of fighting for a title at such a young age? Or would he? Berbick, the veteran, expose the flaws in his game and send him back down the rankings? Everyone had an opinion, but deep down, those who had watched Tyson's rise knew what was coming. This wasn't just a fight. It was a statement. And when the bell rang, the world would finally see what Mike Tyson was truly capable of. When fight night finally arrived, the tension was electric. The crowd roared as Tyson made his way to the ring, his expression cold and focused. This was his moment, and he was ready. Across from him stood Berbick, confident but wary. He had trained hard, prepared for Tyson's power, but nothing could truly prepare a fighter for what it was like to stand in the ring with him. The bell rang, and the fight began. From the opening seconds, it was clear that Berbick was in trouble. Tyson moved like a machine, slipping punches, closing distance, and firing shots with the kind of power that could change a fight in an instant. Berbick tried to hold his ground, but the force of Tyson's attacks pushed him back. The champion was being overwhelmed, forced into a fight he could not control. The first round ended, and the writing was already on the wall. Berbick was hurt, shaken, and struggling to keep up. The second round began, and Tyson wasted no time. He closed in, unleashed a combination, and sent Berbick crashing to the canvas. The champion tried to rise, but his legs betrayed him. He stumbled, fell again, and the fight was over in just 2 rounds, Tyson had done what he had promised. He had become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. The world had witnessed the beginning of a new era. Tyson had arrived, and he was here to stay.
By a TKO, and youngest and new WBC heavyweight champion of the world, Michael Tyson.
Mike Tyson had spent years sharpening his skills in the quiet town of Catskill, away from the distractions and dangers that had once surrounded him in Brooklyn. But the time for training in the shadows was over. He was no longer just a student of the sport, learning under the guidance of those who saw his potential. Now, he was stepping into the world where every punch thrown had real consequences, where every fight was a battle not just for victory, but for respect. The journey from a hungry young prospect to a force in the heavyweight division had begun, and there was no turning back. The transition from an unknown fighter to a professional wasn't just about stepping into the ring. It was about proving to the world that he belonged there. Every match was a test, every opponent a challenge that had to be broken down. The lights were brighter, the cameras were always watching, and the pressure mounted with each passing day. But Tyson wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to send a message. He wanted everyone to understand that he wasn't here to take part in a long climb to the top. He was here to take over, and he would do it in devastating fashion.
Use that?
I take your life. That's what I do. Rockman and those guys, their eyes haven't seen what I've seen. I'm ordained for this. I've been to Valhalla. I've seen the most vicious and most cruelest and coldest white people in the world. They accept me. He can't stop me. Him.
His professional debut was not just a fight, it was a statement. When he entered the ring, there was an intensity in his eyes that even seasoned professionals rarely possessed. The bell rang, and within seconds, his opponent realized what everyone else would soon come to understand. This was not a normal young fighter. This was not just another prospect hoping to climb the ranks. Tyson was something else entirely. His power was overwhelming, his speed unnatural for a heavyweight, and his ability to close distance left his opponents with no room to breathe. His first professional opponent lasted only a matter of moments before crumbling to the canvas, unable to withstand the onslaught. The boxing world took notice immediately. Promoters, trainers, and fight fans had seen young prospects before, but never one like this. He was knocking grown men unconscious with a ferocity that had not been seen in decades. He wasn't just winning, he was demolishing his competition in a way that made people question if anyone could actually withstand his power. With his first professional victory, Tyson had officially arrived. But he knew that one win meant nothing in the bigger picture. He was determined to fight as often as possible, to stay active, to prove that he was not just another talented young boxer, but a force that could not be ignored. Under the careful management of his team, he fought frequently, sometimes just weeks apart, and with each bout, his reputation grew. His opponents, many of them far more experienced, stepped into the ring believing they could handle him, only to be overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of his attacks. The way he moved, the way he struck with devastating force, the way he barely let his opponents breathe, everything about him made it clear that he was something different, something the sport hadn't seen in a long time. But success in the ring also brought new challenges outside of it. The more he won, the more people paid attention. Reporters wanted interviews, promoters wanted deals, and fans wanted to see more. For a young fighter still trying to find his place in the world, the sudden rise to fame was overwhelming. He had grown up fighting for survival, always watching his back, always looking for the next danger. Now he had money, recognition, and the beginnings of stardom. But with that came the risk of losing focus. The distractions, the temptations, the people who wanted something from him, all of it threatened to pull him off course. But for now, The only thing that mattered was the next fight. He wasn't here to enjoy the attention. He was here to become the best. Fight after fight, the result was the same. One opponent after another fell before him, some within the first round, others within seconds. His punches landed like gunshots, his movements were fast and precise, and his head movement made it almost impossible for anyone to land a clean shot on him. He fought frequently, sometimes with only a couple of weeks between fights, and every time he stepped into the ring, he left behind another highlight reel knockout. The boxing press started calling him the most dangerous young heavyweight in the sport. He was a spectacle, a fighter people couldn't look away from. When he fought, fans knew they weren't just watching a boxing match. They were watching destruction in its purest form. His knockout streak continued, each fight adding to his growing reputation. Some opponents entered the ring already defeated, their confidence shattered before the first punch was even thrown. They had seen what had happened to the others, and they knew it was only a matter of time before it happened to them.
This is it. He is gone right now. He has no legs at all. And 10 seconds to go in a round. There's a left hand. He's down again.
As his record improved, so did the attention around him. More cameras, more reporters, more people wanting to get close to the young knockout artist. The boxing world had been waiting for the next big heavyweight, and it seemed like they had found him. But with all the fame and recognition came new pressures, new challenges outside the ring that he had never had to face before. Despite all the success, Tyson remained focused on one goal: to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. Every fight was just another step toward that dream. His team, his trainers, and the people around him worked to keep him grounded. But the world was changing around him faster than anyone could control. The money was pouring in. Endorsements were being offered, and people who had never cared about him before suddenly wanted to be part of his life. The distractions were there, but inside the gym, nothing changed. He still trained like a man possessed. He still pushed himself beyond his limits, knowing that every day of hard work brought him closer to his goal. The discipline instilled in him from his early days in Catskill had not faded. He had seen, too, many fighters become complacent, lose their edge, and throw away everything they had worked for. That would not be him.
I evolved, as I said before, because of my experience as a fighter. I've been fighting collectively for 22 years, counting both amateurs and pro, 23 to be exact, and I feel all around better. I feel more relaxed, more calm, and I'm more intuitive to what I do, and this is truly what I love to do. They're going to learn to respect the Barbarian King.
As his fights grew bigger, so did the level of competition. No longer was he just fighting journeymen or unknown opponents. Now he was stepping into the ring against seasoned veterans, men who had been in the game for years. Some of them had fought champions, others had been champions themselves. But none of that mattered. When they faced Tyson, their experience meant nothing. They couldn't handle the speed, they couldn't handle the pressure, and they certainly couldn't handle the power. They fell just like all the others. The boxing world had seen dominant fighters before, but something about Tyson was different. He wasn't just powerful, he was methodical. He had a style that seemed impossible to counter. His peekaboo defense, his relentless aggression, his ability to slip punches and fire back with devastating combinations. He was a nightmare for anyone who had to fight him. Even seasoned trainers struggled to come up with game plans to stop him. How do you prepare for a fighter who moves like a lightweight but hits like a truck? As he continued his rise, comparisons began. People started mentioning his name alongside the greats of the past. Some said he had the power of George Foreman, the speed of Muhammad Ali, the killer instinct of Sonny Liston. But Tyson didn't care about comparisons. He wasn't trying to be the next anyone. He was trying to be the first and only Mike Tyson. He wanted to carve out his own legacy, one that no one could ever question.
Good right uppercut, and once again, the legs twitch. Hosea in trouble. And down.
The closer he got to a title shot, the more the world paid attention. His fights became must-watch events, drawing in fans from all over. People who had never watched boxing before were tuning in just to see him fight, just to witness the destruction. His highlight reels were everywhere, his knockouts spreading across television screens and newspapers. He had become more than just a fighter. He was a phenomenon. But with fame came new challenges. More people wanted a piece of him. More distractions threatened to pull him away from his focus. The temptations of success were all around him. Money, luxury, and the attention of people who only cared about him because of what he could do in the ring. The boxing world had seen this story before. Young fighters rising too fast, losing control, and watching their careers spiral out of their hands. But Tyson had been trained for this. He had been warned about it. The question was, could he resist it? As he inched closer to his shot at history, the pressure only grew. The expectations were higher than ever. The world was waiting to see if he would become the youngest heavyweight champion of all time. Every fight was a step closer. Every victory brought him nearer to the moment he had been dreaming of since he was a boy in Brooklyn. The storm was building. The world was watching, and Mike Tyson was ready to take it all. Mike Tyson was no longer just a troubled kid from Brooklyn, struggling to survive in a harsh world. He had stepped into an entirely different life, one that revolved around discipline, structure, and a purpose that extended beyond anything he had ever known. Every day in the quiet town of Catskill, New York, he was transforming, shedding the chaos of his past and replacing it with a new identity, one forged through sweat, pain, and relentless dedication. Under the watchful eye of Cus D'Amato, Tyson's raw aggression was being molded into something refined, something dangerous, something that could not only win fights but dominate them. Each morning, before the sun had even risen, Tyson was already awake, pushing himself beyond his limits. He ran miles through the empty streets, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, his feet pounding against the pavement in perfect rhythm. It wasn't just about physical conditioning, it was about mental fortitude, about proving to himself that he was stronger than exhaustion, stronger than the voices in his head that told him to stop. When he returned from his run, drenched in sweat, there was no rest. The real training was just beginning.
Punches are not made, they are born. He was born a puncher. You make me proud when you do this in the ring and you're hitting. That's it, there you go. Now you got, again. Who's the last guy to stop? Time. Very good, that's right.
Inside the gym, every movement was scrutinized. Every punch, every step, every slip of his head had to be precise. He wasn't just throwing punches. He was learning how to dismantle an opponent with ruthless efficiency. He drilled the same combinations over and over, sometimes for hours, until his body responded on instinct. The repetition was brutal, but there was no room for mistakes. He had to be perfect, because the moment he stepped into the ring against real opponents, there would be no second chances. The gym in Catskill was not a place for excuses. If his hands dropped even an inch, if his balance was off, if he failed to move his head in time, he had to do it again. It was a system designed to break weakness and replace it with unshakable confidence. Every day, he faced older, more experienced fighters in sparring sessions that tested not just his skill, but his will to fight through fatigue and pain. Some of these men had been boxing for years, but when they stepped into the ring with Tyson, they quickly realized that he was something different. His power was overwhelming, his speed unnatural for someone his size, and his ability to absorb punishment was something they had never seen before. Despite his rapid improvement, there was always more to learn. He wasn't just being trained to win fights, he was being trained to dominate, to strike fear into anyone who dared to stand across from him in the ring. His movements became faster, his punches more precise, his footwork smoother. He was no longer the wild street fighter who relied on brute strength and instinct. He was becoming a technical machine, a fighter with a plan, a purpose, and an unstoppable drive. As the weeks turned into months, his name started to spread beyond the walls of the gym. People were talking about the young heavyweight who was tearing through sparring partners, knocking down men who were supposed to be teaching him lessons. His reputation was growing, and with it, the expectations placed on his shoulders. But the more people talked, the harder he worked. He knew that talent alone wouldn't be enough. He had seen fighters who had the skills but lacked the discipline, who had the potential but lacked the willpower to push themselves beyond their limits. He refused to be one of them. Outside the gym, his life was simple. He lived under the same roof as Cuss and Camille, eating meals with them, following the same strict routine every day. The streets of Brooklyn felt like a distant memory. There were no gangs, no fights, no survival instincts dictating his every move. Here, in this quiet town, his only focus was boxing. It was a life completely removed from the violence and instability he had known as a child. But even though his surroundings had changed, the fire inside him had not. He carried the memories of his past with him, using them as fuel, as motivation to keep pushing forward. Despite his growing success, the emotional scars of his childhood were still present. The anger, the resentment, the pain. These were things that couldn't just disappear overnight. He had spent years fighting for survival, and that kind of mindset didn't just go away because he was in a different environment. But instead of letting it consume him, he learned to use it. Every moment of hardship, every painful memory, every ounce of rage he had carried since he was a child, it all became part of his training. Instead of fighting against his emotions, he made them work for him, turning them into an unstoppable force in the ring.
We trained them, myself and Teddy at the beginning. We trained them steadily until finally started to get boxing, and then he developed the ability to slip punches and so forth. When he got to the point with slipping punches, we had a difficult time getting people to box with him because he proved to be a very hard puncher with both hands.
Tyson was like a sponge, and he just absorbed everything that Cuss had to teach him.
I don't feel that he can improve much because everything that he knows now is going to take him through the pros and wherever he's going to go, where I'm continually improving myself. And I improved myself on cutting the ring down a lot, and I look forward to a victory here.
His amateur career was beginning to take shape. He was stepping into the ring against real competition, fighters who had been training for years, and he was tearing through them with ease. The way he fought was different from anything people had seen before. He didn't just win, he destroyed. His knockouts were brutal, his opponents overwhelmed by his speed and power before they even had a chance to react. Coaches and promoters started to take notice. They had seen talented fighters before, but nothing like this. He was still a teenager, but he was fighting with the power and aggression of a fully grown man. As the fights continued, his record remained flawless. He was unstoppable. The boxing world was beginning to pay attention. His name was being whispered in gyms across the country, and those who had seen him fight knew that he wasn't just another promising young fighter. He was something else, something special, something terrifying. But no matter how many fights he won, he never allowed himself to become complacent. He had been taught that confidence was necessary, but overconfidence was dangerous. He continued to train as if every opponent was his toughest yet. He pushed himself harder with every session, never satisfied, never thinking he had reached his peak. He had one goal, one mission: to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history. And as his amateur career progressed, it became clear that this was not just a dream. It was a reality waiting to happen. The decision to turn professional was not made lightly. He was still young, still developing, but there was no doubt that he was ready. He had dominated the amateur ranks, and there was nothing left to prove at that level. The time had come to take the next step, to enter the world of professional boxing, where the true challenges awaited him.
Weighing 214 pounds, Mike Tyson!
With every punch he threw, with every step he took toward the future, the world was watching. The quiet days in Catskill were coming to an end. The journey ahead would be filled with triumphs and failures, victories and hardships. The bright lights, the roaring crowds, the temptations of fame and fortune, they were all waiting for him. And as much as he had been prepared for the battles inside the ring, the battles outside of it would prove to be just as dangerous. Mike Tyson had spent years transforming himself into a fighter, but now he was about to face something even greater. The world was about to see him for the first time. The professional stage was calling, and he was ready to answer. The road to the heavyweight championship had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again.